Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way.
Bonjour. Mon ami Jacques Becker a retracé dans tous les détails une histoire vraie. La mienne. Ça s'est passé en 1947. À la prison de la Santé.
I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Le Trou is over. Poor Gaspard.
Nous, on va s'évader, mon vieux. D'ici? D'ici même. Ça, en gros, c'est le plan du sous-sol de la prison. Ouais. Ouais, je comprends, mais d'après toi, où se trouve la descente d'égout? Mais il la surveille, regarde. J'ai jamais éprouvé ça. C'est la première fois de ma vie que je me sens bien dans ma vie.
Andy, this movie, we are kicking off our French crime films series, which is A, very exciting, and B, very French.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, yes, I think so. I can't wait to talk. In fact, oh man, I feel like I missed a massive opportunity here because I think we have a French trope corner. which we need to start.
Whoa.
I am ill prepared for it tonight, but believe me, I'm going to come back to that next week, if so appropriate. But tonight, oh my goodness, there is some good French stuff in here. Le Trou is a French prison escape film. And
Yes.
I can't recall. Had you seen it?
I had not seen this one. No, of our three that we're seeing of it, I had only seen one. So, which will be the last one we'll be talking about.
Well, then I feel like we should start by talking about why we are doing this series, and then we can get into the film a little bit more. How did we stumble on French crime?
I was listening to the Movies That Made Me podcast done by the Trailers from Hell guys, and they had Thomas Jane on, and Thomas Jane was talking about some of his favorite French crime films, and I was just totally drawn in to this conversation as they just named movie after movie, and they all sounded so interesting. And I had seen I'd only touched on a couple of French crime films, probably maybe in film school there was one or two there, and afterward. And so I never really dug too deep, but I knew it was a genre that was out there, something that was inspired kind of by film noir and the French's love of the noir films that we were making. And I was just like, this would be really interesting to explore and dig a little deeper to see some more of these films. So I guess that's kind of where the impetus came from for this.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of how we chose the films, there are a lot of them.
There are a lot
these
of them.
French crime films. And so we ended up with 3 on our list that we are excited about. Now it's been so long since this was a Patreon thing, right? We threw a bunch out and people voted, or did we just pick?
No, we picked the films themselves.
All right.
They,
we're very bright.
Well, we were, for this one, the thing that was frustrating about the French crime films is as we went through the list, we wrote down what all of the ratings were, the star ratings from IMDb. And of all of the categories of the movies that we're talking about in this season, I guess, between now and the middle of the year, like the vast majority of these films were rated really highly, like 7 stars and up. And so it was like, picking, we said, well, we're just going to pick the 3 highest rated films. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's 8.3, 8.3, and 8.3.
I remember this. You were in the car, I think, and I was reading you French crime films, and you said, really smartly, why don't you just read me the highest rated films? And it was a list that never ended. I recall this now.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yes. They're all exceptional films. So we ended up, with the 8.3s, and we begin with The Prison Escape, Le Trou.
And I take that back. 8.6 is what Le Trou is. So we're way up there.
Yes. Yeah. We're in the stratosphere in terms of the IMDb 6-star rule.
Exactly.
And that takes us to this 1960 film directed by Jacques Becker. And we are in La Santé prison with our prisoners. This film has an interesting open. It presents the case, I think, of the prison breakout movie in, I'll say, a compelling way, right? We have all of these, they're all bad guys. How well do you think this film gets you bought into the idea of traveling with these dark protagonists in their efforts to double down on breaking the law by breaking the law again?
It's definitely a question when it comes to any sort of prison breakout movies and just kind of the genre where all of the characters that we're rooting for are criminals and we're rooting for them to escape. We're kind of complicit in the nature of the crime in the case of the film. And so it's a very interesting way of telling a story because you are identifying with kind of bad characters. And I mean, I think what they do is they give you things to like about with these characters and things to root for, and they make them seem very human. So as you follow along with their exploits, you can still identify with them, even if you wouldn't necessarily agree with what they're doing. It's a little easier in the case of our primary protagonist that we have here in Gaspard, because, according to him, he's innocent. And it just makes me think back to Shawshank Redemption and the whole idea of, oh, sure, everyone in here is innocent.
Everyone's innocent.
Yeah, right. And, but, that's kind of the setup of the story. And so perhaps as our lead protagonist, it's a little easier to identify with him and kind of want to see him succeed in helping the rest of his cellmates escape so that he can actually break free as somebody who should be free. So I think that it's tricky in this type of film, but I feel that, like any film, the way that you do it is by making them seem like humans with flaws and foibles and things that you just kind of can connect to. And I think they do a good job with this group. More or less.
They do too, but it's sort of an interesting variation on a theme, right? And I think similar to Shawshank, but that's an apt comparison, because unlike other, I think French prison movies, right? When you think of the biggest of the big French stories, Les Mis is at the very top of the list, right? We've got this guy in prison, and things are just bad, and he is, the thing that we follow him with, the thing that we believe in him is that he did it for just reasons, right? And so the whole narrative of the chase is this guy escaped, but he wasn't a bad guy. He was just trying to feed the poor, feed the hungry, and he stole some bread, and that's like the legacy of French incarceration stories. It's unjust. And I think the period is such that, that cycle is playing again in the 40s, right? The 40s and 50s. And so we have some of that injected into this movie, though they're all, I think, more or less hardened criminals. The case they make with Gaspard is that, he was trying to stop his wife from shooting him, so he grabbed the gun, it went off, and it shot her in the shoulder, and that's why he's in on this attempted murder charge, which that's the proverbial loaf of bread case, but I'm not sure how well it holds up when we reach the climax of the film and he becomes essentially an unreliable narrator. Do we believe that he sat in the warden's office for 2 hours and didn't give up this case as the guards descend on their cell? Suddenly, I don't trust him about his story about what went on in the warden, and I trust him less about what he was telling everybody about what he got away with. Is he just another murdering thug with a pretty face? So, and I don't say that at all as a critique of the film. I actually think it's made more fascinating as a result of how they handle Gaspard and his journey with his own story.
Well, it certainly spins a different, a different color to the relationship that he has with his girlfriend or his wife. The fact that she has now kind of dropped the charges, is it?
Do we believe that she dropped the charges, or do we believe that that's potentially just a story that the warden was telling so that he could get some information out of Gaspard?
I mean, it could be a variety of things. He may just be moving to another cell at the end, and he kind of spun that tale, or he kind of the warden spun that tale to get the truth out, and then Gaspard gets really to go nowhere and is just across the hall now, although maybe his term is shortened. Or maybe
possibly, and let's not forget that the reason his wife was trying to shoot him is because he was having an affair with her 17-year-old sister, right?
Yeah. They are French.
And so it begins.
No, I mean, you're right. It is terrible. But I mean, but what I was saying, though, is it spins potentially even a different perspective on the relationship story. Because if what you're saying is true, and the warden did come to him because his wife did drop the charges, perhaps that's a spin on the relationship. Maybe he did try to kill her, but she's a woman who kind of is living in fear, and she is in a terrible relationship, but can't not get herself out of it. And so she says that he didn't do it, even though it's a terrible relationship, and maybe he is a criminal. So there's a variety of different ways you can kind of read into that, which I think makes it for a much more interesting view on who this character is. And it's possible he's just a good guy, and it was really exactly as he described. Who knows? But regardless, it spins it into a really interesting way.
You make me feel like a hardened cynic. Like all of that, like I came out of my time with this movie feeling like it was an emotional Jenga tower of trust issues that just kept getting pulled out from every single character. And it turns out like the most benevolent characters are the hardest characters, right? The character who was in charge of just like engineering the escape, who just was the strong silent type. He just did his job because he knows how to do it. And like he was the guy I found myself hanging with emotionally the whole time because I found I didn't trust anybody else, least of which Pretty Boy, our protagonist. Yeah.
I found myself, and this is one of those things when you're dealing with criminals. It's like when you walk into a story, how much do you trust them? How much are you buying into their stories? I totally found myself kind of buying into all of them, and I found them all to be really interesting, and I took everything at face value watching this film. And so it's interesting that was the perspective that I ended up going in with. And so at the end, I didn't really have those thoughts. I was like, wow, his wife dropped the charges, and now he's going to squeal because he wants that's a safer way to get freedom rather than following through with escaping out of the hole. And then he's a wanted man. And so it was, I don't know, I just found it to be a really interesting way to kind of see how everything spun here.
And it makes me want to watch the movie again immediately. Like I finished it. Unfortunately, I watched it super late at night. And so I wanted to start it again because I think now, having finished the movie, I will look at it with a completely different lens. It's one of those films. And I think it's a real gift.
Oh, definitely. Something else that's worth talking about is kind of the documentary approach that this story has. I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit, you hinted at it with the beginning, how we have this real character who was involved in the actual breakout as kind of a character in the film. And he's introducing it and saying, hey, this was my story. I was one of these guys. And it's an interesting way to kind of set this whole thing up as this very realistic approach with a real person from it. It's not just the fact that we have a real world character introducing the story for us, but also the fact that the story is kind of shot in a documentary style approach. In fact, Francois Truffaut, who is another French filmmaker, not to mention kind of a critic and somebody who really examined films, he said, "The film moves forward without any pauses or digressions. Every movement, every picture moves the action onward. For the 5 characters in Le Trou, there is only one goal and only one way to reach it. They advance toward freedom as Becker advances toward the appearance of pure documentary." Do you feel like the documentary style approach, and we don't have score, some of the shots are pretty long, it just feels like we're just kind of watching things happen in a prison. Do you feel like that works to kind of lend itself to kind of creating tension and building a story here that's effective?
There is something to this film that doesn't qualify for me after the initial meeting of our protagonist, right? The guy who introduces it, one of the guys who was actually in the event at La Santé.
Well, who was that? That was Jean Carodi.
Carodi, yeah. Jean Carodi, yeah. He was the guy who performed as the character based on himself in the movie. And he's the guy who's working on a car, and he comes up and he's talking directly to us, right? There's that fourth wall break. That's the first and last time that kind of a trick happens in the film. And at no point do the characters acknowledge that the camera is there, right? It's still a straight up omniscient cameraman. And I don't get this sense that, and I'm curious your impression of this, that there is an intentionality that I would ascribe to a more documentarian approach. That if you were going to call this that documentary style, that you would actually feel like there is a bit of architecture to the story, where it's building toward teaching me something, right? Teaching me something about the experience. And this film, for the most part, is just a freight train of almost accidental action, right? I mean, it just is a parade of long shots. Like the camera is there, might as well be sort of a security camera, right? The camera is there and it's presenting just what exactly they're doing, and giving us a sense of the real sort of time of the pacing of the events. I made a note as like, what is this? This is as close to that feeling of anxiety of what I imagine a prison break must feel like when they start hammering away at the concrete, and the way they use sound. It feels more hands off, I guess, more narratively hands off than what I would ascribe as documentary.
Well, it's definitely cinema verite, which, I mean, they set the
Right.
camera up, and I mean, like the moment you're particularly talking about, where it's like, I think it's almost like a 5-minute one shot of when they're trying to break through the floor. And that just kept going. And I was so tense and so nervous as they continued pounding on the floor, because it's so loud. And I mean, that's something that the intentionality of the sound, and just using the sound design with that really long shot to build your anxiety, because they're in a prison and you're worried that the sound is so loud that all of the guards in the prison are going to hear what's going on here. So it was a very interesting way for them to structure that and to kind of craft the story in a way that allowed that tension to build just from kind of the natural way that it unfolded in one long particular shot.
I think you're right, and I think maybe I'm being too
because I mean, what do you think about
my experience here?
I think maybe because, I mean, here's another example of what I would call very docu style in the way that they're telling the story. When we have Gaspard going to pick up his package at the, I don't know what it is, the kind of the mail desk or whatever it is, and you have the guard who basically, the line of prisoners is sitting there waiting as he opens up their package, goes through each item, opens it, cuts it into pieces to make sure there's nothing inside. And he does it with every single thing. And then he packs it all back up, gives it to the person. The next person comes up, and you go through that process over and over and over again, including when Gaspard comes up and you see the guard kind of opening all of his different foods, cutting the cheeses, cutting the sausages, pulling it open. It felt like very authentic, and it was done in a style that I would argue is pretty docu style. It's done in a way that feels very much like this is how the prison worked in 1960 in France.
Yeah, I can see that, and what I love about that scene is that the guard that's actually completely violating all of the prisoners' foods is dressed like a butcher. Did you notice that? Like, he's got the pants and the shirt, and he's got the little apron, and it's very adorable.
What's funny is this is just a total aside. I just watched. After watching this, I watched the Grand Budapest Hotel, and there's a scene in the prison when all this stuff's coming in, but they don't touch the Mendel pastries because they're so beautiful. They open it up and they just look at them and pass it along. And I was like, that's all they needed was just some Mendel pastries. So here's a question for you, because we're talking about how we have I'm terrible at pronouncing his name, but Carodi, is that how you said it? Jean Carodi. The real criminal introducing this film. Does that end up kind of throwing you out of it a little bit, or what does that do for you? Because there is kind of a line of films that do this, where they incorporate the real people into the story. So I'm thinking of some more recent ones like American Animals or Clint Eastwood's The 1517 to Paris. Possibly even something like American Splendor, which isn't really the same style, but still you're bringing the characters in as characters, and it's kind of this whole thing. So is it something that works?
Yeah, I feel like that's a loaded question because 2 of the 3 of those, I think it worked very well. And this one, I think, works very well. And I think Eastwood's 1517 to Paris was dare I say, a train wreck. And it was nay unwatchable. So I think it can really work. And in this case, it did work for me. And I think that is because, one, time does what it does, right? The face just ends up blending in with the other faces in the cell block so quickly for me that I didn't give it another thought after it opened. And I think, interestingly, they didn't go back to it at the end. Like, there was no sense that there was any resolution to why he opened this show or this movie. I think it could have been done without it. And maybe it's to its discredit that I literally gave it no other thought.
But it's there. And so I think it's very intentional. And I think that speaks to what Truffaut was pointing out about it, is that this is a filmmaker who, this story is a very specific story. It takes place over very few days as this group of inmates is working to achieve this goal. And all we do over the course of this film is watch them work toward getting to that goal. And that's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a very simple story. And I think by including that particular real person in it, it just helps it. I don't know. For me, you're right. I mean, it's not something that you end up thinking about the whole time, other than I do think about it when I see that, he's actually missing fingers. I wonder if he lost those before they were doing the escape or during the escape. Right. Like those sorts of things that run through your head. But still, it's one of those things that for me gave me a sense of reality of when they're doing things. I'm like, so this is how they were really doing it. It kind of puts it into a perspective where I end up buying into things a little more and don't necessarily feel like the filmmakers were changing the story to make it more cinematic or something.
But Andy, I wonder though, I'll ask you, recognizing it's hard to sort of retcon the film that we just watched, but like, they used this, I think, so subtly is not the word, but it's just such a little nod toward the truth of the event by showing him in the very beginning. That and name dropping the director, we have to say that like part of his job in the beginning is to say that Becker has made this story. It is my story. It happened in my time in this prison, and here it is. Ta-da. But could they have accomplished the same thing with a title card, right? I mean, this was based on a book, right? It's based on Jose Giovanni's book. It tells the story of the real escape attempt from La Sante in 1947. Could they have achieved the same ends by just giving us a stark title card and taking us right into the story?
But it's more than that, because we have this character here, and he's playing a character in the movie. So not only do we see that intro, and if that's all it was, and then we had 5 actors playing the actors.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They could have done it with just the title card or something like that. This was based on a true event, blah, blah, blah. But they go to the trouble of having this intro, and then this person, who actually is a pretty good actor, is playing a version of himself in the process of the escape. And for me, it lent a lot more authenticity to it.
I think it's fascinating because, at one, you're absolutely right. The guy's a pretty good actor, and I felt like he fell right in with everybody else in the cast, like just perfectly. I just wonder if they're going to go that direction, if part of the challenge is a little bit of a bait and switch, that he's playing a role in this thing by opening with his face and having him walk toward us from working on the car and giving him that sort of introductory starring role, it feels like he should be, to me, a bigger part of the movie, like a bigger sort of star part of the movie. And the movie is generally very even, with the exception of Gaspar's character, who gets a little bit more of a starring role.
But he's kind of like the leader of the troupe, I felt. I mean,
right.
They each had their own thing, but he seemed to be the one who kind of had the plan and the one who the first one to go into the hole and stuff like that. Like, he seemed pretty in the know. Like he had put all.
That's
of this
interesting
together.
to me. You didn't think he was that went to Manu Borelli. My sense was Manu was like he walked in. Manu was the guy who sort of owned the process.
You're right. You're right.
He was kind of our hero thug.
Well, he was, but I guess it's one of those things where Manu seemed like he was the one who was in charge, but it really seemed like it was actually Roland who was the one who was kind of the one who knew what was going on and the one who kind of
Roland
made things happen.
Wozniak. Roland was the Wozniak. He was a total Woz, and it was Manu was a Steve Jobs, and every successful organization has both.
They all have to have both, right?
Yeah.
Well,
this is Woz's story of the engineering of Prison Break. We figured it out. Only took us about 40 minutes. That's fine.
Finally. Now, it is super fascinating. And here's something else that we're not taking into account. This film was released in 1960 in France. This was just 4 years after Carodi was released from prison. So it's possible that in France, people were more familiar with his story and they would more easily recognize him. And that would, for that particular audience of 1960s French people watching this, it could have really kind of hit at home that much more as they were watching him do the introduction and then him playing a character throughout.
Absolutely. And, that was the first thing when I saw that you brought this up in the notes, like that. I wonder if this is the 1960s version of stunt casting in France. Right.
This was the 1517 in Paris in 1960.
That's right.
It's just Becker pulled it off better.
Right. I think it was. I think this is what stunt casting looks like here. 50 years later, it aged pretty well.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, it's a really fascinating film that it's just one of those. I really do enjoy Prison Break movies. I think that they can make for very exciting, gripping stories with interesting characters. And this one, I really didn't know what to expect. The fact that really the entire film is just focused on this very specific task of these guys trying to get out. And that's all you do for the duration of the film is kind of journey with them in the process. I really felt a part of the process and just really was drawn into all the little minutia that they kind of had to put into place to make things happen, whether it was coordinating their jobs from the guards so that they always had giant piles of boxes to be constructing as their work. I don't know what it is, but the work that they did so that they could cover up their hole, the way that they cleaned things up, just everything, the way that they kind of ate their food and passed stuff around. I found it all so fascinating to watch and it was really engrossing.
I thought so too. I was really moved by the busy work of their day-to-day experience in the cell. What'd you think of the actual, we'll call it production design, but I mean, they were modeling after a cell in La Santé prison. It's a real place. It's not like they have to worry about that. What'd you think of the accommodations?
Consider they were sleeping 5 people in a room. It seemed pretty tight, but they made it work. It wasn't horrible. They had cabinets. They had space. It was okay. I mean, they obviously had leaky pipes and stuff that were problematic. I have seen some prisons. We have done some projects in old closed prisons and walking around in them. It's they're not too different.
It was definitely cramped, and I liked the way you could see them. They just throw all the mattresses on the floor and squeeze them the way they are, and folded up all of the hardware for the bed. That you get a sense that, hey, when this prison opened, this might have been a cell for a prisoner or two, and
right.
That there was hardware for a prisoner or two, and now it has 5 people sleeping on the floor, and you can get a sense of the just general state of overcrowding. And yet everybody was pretty good-natured, I think, throughout the whole thing.
Except those plumber prisoners.
Except the plumbers. They got theirs, right? They got a good slapping. You will not take those stamps.
That's right.
Yeah, we should say, if I may, because I'm fascinated by the fact that this was by prisons in general. This was a prison that does exist, and I have been there.
As in, you stayed there. You spent some time.
I did. I did some time. Yes, it is very close. I mean, it's not like downtown Paris, but it's very, very. It's about a 10-minute drive from Notre Dame, which is point zero in Paris, the place, by which there's a little star on the ground, and it's a place by which like everything is measured, and so it's about 11-minute drive, straight line down one road, gets you straight to the prison, and I think that too is telling, right, about the sort of cultural significance of being in prison in Paris, that it's okay to put a prison right in the middle of a cultural center like Paris in 1860, right, when this thing opened, 1867. It's just a norm that this giant sort of monolithic brick structure in the middle of this city stands there as a monument to crime and to crime celebrity today. And it is still very much in operation. As a matter of fact, I love that one of the Wikipedia pictures is the same angle that we get in this movie when they come up out of it's actually not the same angle, but it's at the same street corner looking down at the main entrance of this thing. When our two exploratory prisoners stick their heads up out of the manhole, it's looking down the street at the front entrance of the prison itself. And so, you go to Wikipedia, you can see the daylight view of that, and I think it's just a fascinating monument that is still very much in operation. Only 3 escapes have ever actually happened there, as far as they know. One of them in 1927, Leon Daudet, after only 13 days in prison, he had faked paperwork, and he actually got them to release him, which I think is awesome. Jacques Becker he escaped from many, many prisons, and he had such an affinity for disguises that they actually nicknamed him the Man with 1,000 Faces. He led an escape with François Besse and Comment Reeves, who died in the process in 1978, and Michel Vaujour. His wife Nadine lowered a helicopter into the prison in May 1986 and flew him away. So those are the only 3 that actually ever succeeded, which leads us to our, once again, our main point. This is a prison break that did not succeed. Right. Andy, does that make for a great prison break movie?
I definitely think so, because you get your hopes up so much in prison break films. You're like, oh, can they do it? Can they do it? Are they going to make it out this time? And it can create a real nice tragedy when they don't. And that's what I loved about this film, is it builds up this hope within you as they're kind of going through such lengths to get out, only to have at the very end, it all just kind of falls apart in kind of just such a small and kind of just a I don't know. The way was like, oh, wow. It was just, happenstance that all of that happened with his wife, and that she was kind of dropping her charges, and that was it. And so it's like, okay, we're over. And I'm going to, however you read it, it ends up creating such a tragedy for the rest of the guys, because you may not end up feeling like they're your best friends by the end of the film, but you certainly feel for them, because boy, did they go through a lot over the course of this film.
I think so too. I was spoiled only insofar as I knew that I'd already read up on the prison, because I was just curious about it, and I was dumb, and so I looked up La Santé because I thought, I think I've been there, and I saw there's a big section in Wikipedia that says there are only 3 escapes, and looking at the years, cross-referencing, because I'm a real smarty, this story of Trou is not in the 3. So I knew this one wasn't going to be a successful escape.
Sure. Yeah.
And it becomes a testament to the production, right? To Becker and his leadership and of the adaptation and presenting it on screen, that this thing is still a monumental success for me. It is riveting. It is anxious. It is terrifying. It is tragic. Even though I already knew it would fail, I had my hopes up through most of the second act. When they got out, it was heartbreaking to watch them go back in. Even though I knew they had to go back in to get the other guys, I knew they had to do it.
I know, but you're like, oh, they're there. They're there.
There's right there.
Run.
You can taste it. Oh God, yes. There's a cafe. Go get a coffee.
Right.
So I think that it was enormously, just terrifically well constructed, that it could achieve that kind of hook for me. And even though I knew where it was going.
Well, I think part of that, we need to talk a little bit about, we've mentioned the sound certainly, and some of the long lingering shots that kind of stayed with us. But I definitely think that we also have to talk about just a little bit of the camera work, particularly the way that it changes from when we're in the prison and it's pretty straightforward. It's, everything is lit pretty evenly. Yeah. But then you go down into the hole and they're exploring in kind of it feels like catacombs that they're kind of wandering around.
Yes.
And the way they light that.
Sewers.
Yeah. It's so dark. And oftentimes it's just by one little light source. And sometimes the camera will stop and the characters will just go down a long, straight passageway. And you just see this little dancing light that just kind of keeps drifting farther and farther away. I mean, it's haunting and it's beautiful. And it really kind of creates this sense of space where you are. And you just end up feeling so claustrophobic throughout. It's just, it does everything to kind of lend to this suspense as to what's going to happen. And it makes you so tense. Like as they're wandering and there are guards wandering down there too. You're like, oh, are they going to open a door and like go right into a guard's face?
That sequence, Andy, where I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that is a great example of everything you're talking about here, right? The way they use light and shadow, the way they let it play off of the incredible textures of the brick, of the stonework, right? The foundational stonework. And the fact that we have for me, the real standout part of this sequence underground is when we have a wide shot and we're looking at the prisoners standing on one another's shoulders and like encircling a column as the guards are moving on the other side of the column. And on one hand, like I talk about it and it's like that's like a vaudeville trick that seems like it's right off of a comic stage from 1890, but it is incredibly intense. It is incredibly intense because it adds this extra layer of, oh my God, he's standing on his shoulders. Now gravity is involved. Like anything could happen, and one of those things is they could just straight up buckle under the weight of two men. Right. And the police, the guards are 5 feet away. Oh, fantastic.
It's really intense.
So back to Gaspard and the climax of the film, right? He goes down and he talks to the warden and they have their little conversation. And I think there's a real subtlety to how this last sequence is structured. First and foremost, he's talking to the warden in a very congenial tone, and he gets the good news from the warden that his wife has dropped the charges. And that's kind of it, right? Then we cut back to him going back to his cell. And there is every reason to believe, if nothing else happens, there's every reason to believe that that was the extent of the conversation that he had with the warden and everything's okay. But it's only through the interrogation, the persistence of the other inmates in the cell with him, that we find out that, and I love the way this is dropped, that he was actually in the meeting with the warden for 2.5 hours. Right. We were not, as the audience, we were not in that meeting for 2.5 hours. The other inmates weren't in the meeting for 2.5 hours. If this is such a documentary presentation, what happened for the other 2.5 hours? And thus begins the sort of mystery and the unraveling of our trust in Gaspard. I think that is beautiful. And that it is paired with this unraveling of their plan and the mechanics of their plan, and all highlighted through one moment with this tiny toothbrush piece of glass mirror. And I think you and I are equally enraptured by how they use this mirror.
Yeah, to create that little periscope tool, what an amazing visual that allowed them to play with as they would stick it through the guard's peephole and use it to kind of check to see if the hallways were clear. And it works beautifully throughout the film so that they can see what's going on. But holy cow, does it give a great surprise at the end when he flips it around and sees pretty much all the guards in the prison standing outside their door, just waiting to kind of crash in and invade. And I mean, that created such a moment of like just a great twist, and huge adrenaline rush. Is all of a sudden, you're right there with the prisoners. You're going, oh crap, they're trying to frantically get everything hidden and stuff. I mean, it just was really exciting the way that played.
It was very intense. And to cut back to Gaspard standing against the wall as everybody's looking at him, and then he screams right as the door opens and the guards come in and just, start wailing on him. I mean, I think that was incredibly well structured. What did you,
with a lot of great whip
expect?
pans from face to face, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, so great. Do you remember what you expected? Like, did you have an expectation as he's playing with the mirror, he's looking down the hall? Do you remember what you thought was going to happen?
I didn't think anyone was going to be there. Like, I honestly was like convinced that they were going to make it out. Like, I just was like so right in their heads. Like, I was with those guys and I was like, it's going to be clear. They're going to make it. This is it. And I was not expecting that, I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting all the guards to be standing there suddenly.
You're a real innocent.
I am.
Kid innocent. That's so funny. I had a feeling something was going to happen. I knew they were going to use it as some sort of a shock, and I thought it might be, the old two guards running down, or maybe it would be one guard like standing there, like one face. And the second he turns the mirror and you see all the guards, I have this like sense memory of, oh yeah, that was the right decision. All of my ideas were dumb. This was the right one. He got it. He totally nailed it. That was so good.
Yeah, it was great.
How do you think they shot that? If somebody were to say, okay, Andy, it's 1960, go make this rig so that we can capture everything and make the mirror the right size so that it's a functional unit in the frame.
I mean, that's a great question. And it's tricky filming stuff like that because the plane of focus is so shallow and you're filming this thing that's so close, and to film it where you're capturing the details exactly of what the mirror is seeing. I don't know.
And the mirror's on the Z-axis moving away from the camera lens, right? So it's like you're filming something so small that it's to my head, it seems like just even at the end of the mirror, it's going to be out of focus already.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you say his name. Ghislaine Cloquet, is that how you say the DP's name?
Ghislaine, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, sure. I don't know what he was doing to film this, but I don't know. I just found it really fascinating. And every time I would see it, I'm like, gosh, this seems really ahead of its time for 1960. And I know that the film industry is always trying new things. That's I think one of the great foundations of it is filmmakers are always taking the tools that exist and finding new ways to kind of do more with them. And I think that's very exciting. And it's possible they were just kind of playing with a way to kind of do that and use filming really close objects like that. Because I can't remember, was the background when you'd see through the peephole and you'd see the mirror, were you seeing stuff behind the mirror, like beyond it, that was also in focus, or was everything else out of focus? Do you recall?
There's one angle where it is almost straight on the mirror, and so you're looking down. You're looking down the hallway, and it's pretty much like everything is very, very sharp focus,
including what's behind it, or beyond.
Including what's behind it. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's
how did they do
really
that?
Interesting depth of field, because you're getting a very close object
Yeah.
with what's in it and everything behind it.
Right. But it's that final shot that I'm most interested in. Anyway, it's a fantastic shot, and it is a miracle of steadiness and that we can get such a clear. The only thing that's moving in the frame is the mirror itself, and so it's expertly put together and so just brilliantly used.
Definitely, yeah, fantastic work by Becker and Cloquet. I mean, they really put it together nicely. Not to mention the editing. I mean, Marguerite Renoir, who was the ex of Jean Renoir, who was the mentor to Becker. It's kind of this whole full circle sort of thing. I mean, she was one of the editors on this, and definitely had a hand in making this story kind of come together the way that it did. So it's a great team, and Jacques Becker, who unfortunately died like weeks after finishing. I don't even think he got to ever see the finished product.
My understanding was that he died before the thing was even finished editing. Like they finished shooting and went into production. He wasn't even involved in a lot of that.
Yeah, a lot of the editing. So I'm guessing that a lot of it kind of came through with Marguerite, having known him and kind of grown up with him, I guess, as a filmmaker, probably was able to tell the story the way that he wanted. And that also, I wonder if, this is really interesting. I wish that I knew the backstories here. I wonder if Becker had planned that opening, or if that's something that they added after he died as a way to kind of remember him a little more.
Wow, that's an interesting thing to bring up. It makes my whole position really sad. You know what? I take it back.
It all is very intriguing. Just a fantastic film, though. Just with an amazing. I was so tense watching this film. I was just endlessly impressed with the work that Becker and his team did here.
Look at guys like Michel Constantin, and he's got, 64 credits to his name. We've got Jean Carodi, who has this. This is his thing, but obviously that's because he was an inmate, and so he doesn't. Yeah, it was really his only
film. But there were a few other films based on his life. Les Aventuriers and Roland were two other films.
Philippe Leroy he's got 188 credits to his name, so he's was clearly popular. Raymond Meunier, he's got 55. So these guys, in terms of their kind of star tour, and I should add Marc Michel as Gaspard. He's got another 58 credits to his name through this period, and still, he died in 2016. So, but he was still working.
This was for a good number of the people you just mentioned, their first film. Like, this was where they got their start. So they might have done 100 some films, but the whole Le Trou was where they.
That's what Becker was trying to do, right? Was like take these unknown guys and tell a story. Not all of them were inmates, right? They were they were actors, and I mean, just unknowns, and that's what he was going for. Because of that, he was kind of looking for more of that documentary style, that style where you didn't see faces that you recognized. And I think that's something we'll see. I'm curious, I guess I should say, if we're going to find that in the next films that we watch in our series. Is there any reason to hope that this movie has a sequel that eventually they got out?
This has not been remade. There's no sequels, nothing like that. But, like I said, I'm now kind of curious to look at these other films that were based on Carodi's life and kind of see what other stories he had to tell that people felt, let's make some more films about this guy.
Yeah, well, he figured out how to get out of prison, right?
Right. I know. Then I saw he later hosted a game show on the radio.
Yeah,
I'm like, wow, right. What an interesting life this guy had.
Yeah, that's right. He's a real Hudson Hawk of '60s France.
Jeez.
See what I did there?
I see what you did there, yes.
All right. How'd it do at awards season?
It was, kind of one of those films that had 2 wins, 4 other nominations. At the BAFTAs, they have a category, the best film from any source, which I assume means any country. It lost, though, to Ballad of a Soldier, which was from the Soviet Union. Also nominated for Best Foreign Actor, Philippe Leroy, who lost to Paul Newman in The Hustler. At Cahiers du Cinema, it was on the best film list, which is a list of the 10 best films. It did make it to 10th place. First place went to Sancho the Bailiff. At the Cannes Film Festival, it lost the Palme d'Or to La Dolce Vita. The French Syndicate of Film Critics, they gave it the best film, and it in a tie with Breathless, I should say. And at the Juicy Awards, or Juicy Awards, I'm not exactly sure how you say that, Becker won the Diploma of Merit for Best Foreign Director.
Well, that sounds like something.
That sounds officious.
It sure does. It doesn't sound prideful. It sounds merely notable.
The Diploma of Merit.
It's the official you were here.
Right.
Attendance has been taken. All right, Andy. So the big one, how did it do at the box office?
This is something I was going to worry about with this series. This is just a film. There's just no information about the financials of this film. It was frustrating. I dug around but couldn't find anything. And we'll have to see how I fare with the next 2. This did open in France March 18th, 1960, before playing at the Cannes Film Festival a few months later. The movie did open briefly in New York several years later, actually, May 26th, 1964. It didn't have a wider release around the U.S. until Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1967. So 7 years before it actually had a release around most of the country. But it did finally get its release, and, all I can say is hopefully earn some money in the process.
We're nothing if not optimists.
That's right.
Okay. Well, it's a great way to kick off our series on French crime films. I had a blast watching this movie. I hope it does okay when we rank it.
I do too.
Head over to flickchart.com and you will see all of the movies that we have ranked on this very show. If you swipe over in your show notes and you tap the word flickchart, it should take you straight to Le Trou in the catalog, where you can add it to your own list and see how it stacks up against ours.
All right, first up we have Le Trou, or The Lion in Winter. Oh, I'm going to take Le Trou here.
Yeah, I'll take Le Trou.
Oh dear, Pete. Le Trou or Hudson Hawk?
Hudson Hawk, shut up.
I'm sorry, I got to go with Le Trou.
I know, but just give it to me just give me we got to go to the mat just for principle.
We do have to go to the mat. Yes, we do. All right, here we go.
This is going to upset people. All right.
Let's see. One,
two, three.
Scissors.
Cat. Oh, well, you win. Scissors beats cat.
Cat. All right. Le Trou or Scott Pilgrim versus the World?
Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, I gotta say Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, I mean, I love it how you had that pensive thought sound.
Well, there is a lot to love about Le Trou.
Yeah,
there really is. I mean, in the context of Prison Break films, it's pretty high up there. Like, this was a really great film.
Yeah.
All right, so next up, Le Trou or L.A. Confidential?
L.A. Confidential.
Yeah, I'll take L.A. Confidential. The great Christopher Plummer vehicle. Le Trou or Creed 2? It's almost a rhyme.
Creed 2.
Boy, I sure loved Creed 2. Yeah, I'll say Creed 2. Can't believe how much I love that one. Le Trou or Predestination? Oh my.
Wow.
A film with a lot to mull over.
This one I'm on the fence. I could go
I'm going to say Le Trou here. Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah. Le Trou or The Social Network? Oh, Social Network.
Social Network.
Le Trou or Shaun of the Dead? You got to go Shaun of the Dead.
Shaun of the Dead.
Le Trou or Live Free or Die Hard?
Okay.
This right. I will probably say Le Trou.
Yeah, I'm Le Trou on this. I was ready for you. I was ready to give it to you, whatever you wanted. No, I mean, I could. Yeah,
okay.
But
you're flexible. I see.
Yeah.
Well, that lands Le Trou in spot 102 on our chart. 102
say
out
that
of
again?
400. That lands the Trou in spot 102. on our chart.
Just one more time. I'm trying to get a hip hop beat out of that.
That lands Le Trou above Creed 2. Or no, sorry, that lands Le Trou just below Creed 2 in spot 102 on our chart. 102 out of 439 films on our chart, which is about 77%.
But Andy, how did Le Trou do on your own flick chart?
It wasn't, it hit some stuff that I just couldn't get above. And so, again, I feel like I need to do some re-ranking, but it landed in spot 1208 out of 4293, which is, it's 70-something%.
Wow. Mine, that's fascinating. Mine ended up out of how many films now? I'm working on it. 1435. 417 out of 1435, which is a 71%, Andy. Look at us. We're flick chart bros.
Pretty comparable.
But the problem is that means if I am to go by the algorithm for letterboxd.com/the next reel, this should be a 3.5 star film, and that feels too low to me. Does it you?
Oh, drastically. Yeah, I saw where it landed. I'm like, oh, this film should be much higher than that. This is a straight up 4.5 star film for me. 4.5 and a heart. I really, really just was blown away by this film. And I could see it definitely going higher on my rankings and on future viewings.
Why 4.5 stars? Where did the half star fall off? If we're looking at, I don't even remember what we called it. When you hear the stars falling off, like what was the star minute that it stopped being a 5-star movie?
I don't know if it did, and now you're making me feel guilty for not having said it was a 5-star film. Like you set me up in some malicious way to make me question my
Andy,
sensibilities.
all of this comes from my own sense of insecurity, because for me this was a 5-star film, and then you make it a 4.5 star film over there, and I thought we were flick chart bros, and then I wonder,
our
did
conversation
I miss something?
made this a 5-star film for me too.
For crying out loud!
There
Hallelujah! Amen.
No, I don't know. I just watched it and I said, 4.5. So I don't know. But our conversation, I found a lot more to love. So I'm okay giving it 5 stars now that I've been bullied into it.
Bullied? You've been rationalized into it, Andy. You've been gently reminded of your true feelings.
I appreciate that. And you're right. Gaslighter. You always said this was a 5-star film.
Okay, so I know you loved watching Rafifi tonight. How do you feel about our next movie?
Oh, you're terrible.
In all seriousness, Andy, that ends our conversation on the Trou and moves us on to something new.
Hey.
Number 2 of our series.
That's right. We're going to be looking at Rafifi, which I have not seen. This is another one I have not seen. And this was actually made a few years earlier than this one. So I am curious to check this one out. It is directed by, I believe I mentioned earlier, Jules Dassin. Or Jules Dassin. How do you say that name? Jules Dassin?
Jules Dassin. Yeah.
Although he is American. So I don't know if you just said Jules Dassin.
So Jules Dassin.
Yeah. He was an American blacklisted filmmaker who moved overseas. And I am very curious to see this one, and because I've heard nothing but good things. So Rafifi will be next on our list. Rafifi from 1955.
Very exciting. I'm liking these French movies, Andy. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
Oh, and how. Except for not really this time. Everybody just came to give a nice, honest review of their movie, and they generally quite liked it.
Or generally they did, yes.
There are, in fact, no one-star reviews for this movie. So we went to the bottom of the barrel, we scraped it, and it was shiny, spick and span.
Yes.
As the kids say. But I did find dibs. I took the dibs on the one 2-star movie, or 2-star review of this movie.
Well, let's go up. You start,
okay.
because I got a 3-star.
Citrus 1 said he watched this movie on DVD and reviewed it in 2012. Prison breaks are an interesting subject, so this should have been a good movie. However, I found myself bored by it. Whatever it takes to make a film exciting is missing here. I don't know. Young Werner didn't like this. Didn't like this movie.
He had a tough time with that one.
He had a really tough time. There was a secret ingredient that they left out when they made this movie.
Penguins.
So dumb.
Penguins.
So he is the deadly penguins.
Well, I've got a 3-star by Eric Samber, who has this to say: 3 stars, the not so great escape.
Oh, punny.
This is a good movie. Maybe a very good movie, but I can't say I was quite as thrilled as many of the other reviewers were. I'll say 3.5 stars. Here's the scoop. 5 guys in a French prison, one of them a newbie, attempting to escape by digging into the prison basement, worming their way through the prison well and sewer system, then pounding their way through cement into the city sewer system and freedom. This didn't strike me as being quite as intense as other viewers seem to think. There were some tense moments, but nothing that hasn't been exercised to a greater degree in similar movies. What I did like were the characters and the prison environment itself, the degree of respect which the authorities treated the inmates, and vice versa, was something you'd never see in an American film. One scene involving plumbers hired to fix a leaky faucet in the main character's cell borders on surreal. The characters are good. You'll like them. They work well together, share food and cigarettes, and don't try to muscle or bully each other. They have a common goal and do what they need to succeed. All share the load equally. And there was some clever stuff as well. Their procedures and gimmicks for tools and getting around and through things was a great pleasure to behold. On the downside was the pounding. For my dollar, way too much time was spent hammering through floors and walls. At 2 hours and 22 minutes, a lot of time could have been shaved by editing down those scenes, and the movie would have been none the worse for it. It was simply unnecessary watching and hearing these guys pound through whatever the obstacle was. This is a good movie. I liked it a lot, and the folks at Criterion did a sweet job in bringing it to DVD. It just wasn't quite the powerhouse for me that it was for some of the other viewers.
You know, it seems like he's looking for the Turner classic colorized version of this movie. Turner's actually got rid of all the concrete scenes, and it's only 11 minutes. It's amazing. Find it on TCM. Thanks, Amazon. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We are highlighting adaptations from Season 9 over at our Originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. That's the site where listeners can purchase the source material for all of our adapted film discussions.
We had a big Robin Hood series this season, looking at 9 different versions on screen. Many were likely adapted from Howard Pyle's The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, including Douglas Fairbanks in Robin Hood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Disney's Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, and the 1991 Robin Hood, and Ridley Scott's Robin Hood.
Robin and Marian was specifically based on the ballad The Jest of Robin Hood.
And we really don't have too much to say about Robin and the Seven Hoods.
We talked Dead Ringers for our David Cronenberg series adapted from Barry Wood and Jack Geislin's novel Twins.
Have you checked out that show?
You know, I haven't, but I've heard great things.
2 comedies from our Steve Martin series were adaptations, Pennies from Heaven from the BBC series, and The Lonely Guy from the book by Bruce J. Friedman.
The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas was part of our Colin Higgins series, adapted from the Broadway musical.
Spike Lee brought us Black Klansman from Ron Stallworth's memoir.
And we looked at a trio of John le Carré adaptations, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, The Little Drummer Girl, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Plus, all 3 movies in our Agnieszka Holland series were based on books, Europa, Europa, In Darkness, and Spore.
La Cage aux Folles and its remake The Birdcage both came from Jean Poiret's original play.
We also talked about Arsenic and Old Lace and Charade in our Cary Grant series.
All of these were based on other material, and it is all available on our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals. Every book purchased supports the podcast.
Get the full list of adaptations we've covered and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.